Welcome back. We're talking about the relationship between China and Central and Eastern Europe. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Tamas, I want to get to you. We're talking about these 16 countries here. Now, 11 of them are members of the European Union. And I'm wondering, does that pose complications for them in dealing with China sort of outside the framework of the EU?
So it's indeed true that the European Union has some major concerns regarding China's activity here in Central Europe. I was in Brussels last week, and many colleagues over there were complaining about China and the 16+1 cooperation. But I think it has to be emphasized that there are a lot of double standards in Western Europe regarding the Central European member states. I think it was all Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and any other major Western European member states. Those are all eager to rush to Beijing if they want to make business and if they want to sell their own products to China. So Central European countries are about to follow their footsteps. Some major Western European companies entered the Chinese market almost 40 years ago, and Central Europe is about to start the same process. We can also have some benefits of the Chinese market. Of course, there are some political reasons for that as well, not only economical. 5 years ago, I already had some impression in Brussels that the European Union itself and major member states had some political concerns regarding China's activity here in Central Europe. China, according to their understanding, may try to divide and rule Europe through Central European countries. I don't believe it's true. Central Europe is an inherent part and an integral part of the European Union. Our major trade partner is the European Union. We are part of the EU, but at the very same time, we would like to have very good relations with China as well, because it's in our economic interest.
Grzegorz, you wanted to say something about this?
I don't think there is a competition, or at least there should not be. I see it as not an alternative, but rather support from European Union perspective, even from the Brussels bureaucracy, from European Commission perspective. The more direct investment, the more engagement of China in investment in infrastructure in so-called East Central Europe, the better also for Western Europe, for the rich part of the European Union, because we do have to upgrade our infrastructure, and that is also on the behalf of the other countries or regions in the European Union. We have to make an attempt to think more and more that we are the European Union, yet there is a little bit weaker, lagging behind, but developing faster, eastern part of this European Union, including the countries which are knocking the door of Balkan region, which are not yet the member. These 5 countries of Southern Europe, which are within the 16 initiative, but not yet in the European Union. So if I was at the helm of the European Union, I would be happy that China is coming with the project within the bolder scope of New Silk Road, 16+1, because it facilitates the process of European integration, and European Union is #1 partner for China in the future process of irreversible globalization. So if there are some reservations, I would say they are not systematic, they are not political, they are not ideological. Yeah. This is rather a wrong viewpoint, or some politicians or bureaucrats in some particular countries or in Brussels, because China's more active economic position here in the longer run, it is a long shot. We work on the behalf of not only Eastern Europe, but the whole European Union and the bilateral relations between our over 500 million people and your almost 1.4 billion people. It is a very significant process, and I would very much watch the reaction of the United States from the one perspective, and to some extent also of Russia. But Russia is a fan of this process, because one silk or one belt, in this case one road, it goes from China through Russia to East Central Europe. This is the geography which has the economic and political consequences.
Victor, we know that China is a champion of the globalization process. Let's take a listen to what the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang had to say in Hungary during that visit. Let's watch.
Although we are located at the two ends of Eurasia, distant apart geographically, we have set up a trans-regional cooperation platform which allows the globalization to truly cover every corner of the world while facilitating complementary cooperation for each nation and region in line with their different conditions. Such cooperation pushes the world to be more open and is conducive to equity.
So, Victor, how does this relationship with Central and Eastern Europe fit into China's wider vision for a sort of interconnected world?
Well, China now is a strong champion for globalization, for free market, and for common destiny of mankind. And I think in this overall context, Central and Eastern Europe becomes very, very important, not only in terms of connectivity covering the Eurasian continent, but also in terms of dealing with each of the 16 countries, because each one is different. Each one has new challenges. Each one has new and very unique circumstances. For example, I traveled from Estonia to Latvia, all the way down to Lithuania, and the road over there in these three countries are very, very preliminary. It may be sufficient for local use, but if you look at the Baltic states as a transit point, all the way from Finland down to South Europe, and all the way from East Asia, Central Asia, through Central Europe to Western Europe, for example, then the roads are not sufficient. So what China wants to do is to help and work closely with these countries in terms of designing and building out the new connectivity projects so that these countries will benefit and surrounding countries will benefit, and as a whole, Europe will benefit and China will benefit. And you talked about EU. EU is very important to China. Major EU member states like Germany and France, Italy and UK are very important trading partners to China. But China also wants to be fully engaged with smaller European countries, countries in the Baltics, for example, countries in East Europe, so that everyone can have a share of China's continued rapid economic growth. I think this is what China stands for, a win-win situation. It's not China wins twice, it's China wins once and China's partners win once. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And what President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Li Keqiang have been talking about on the global forum is exactly in line with this common prosperity goal that China wants to pursue with all the other countries on the Eurasian continent, and in this case, very much in Central and East Europe.
Anton, strategically or politically, if we want to look at it that way, how does this changing relationship between, let's say, China and Central and Eastern Europe, does it change the global balance of power in any way?
It doesn't change it, but it's a reflection of a process that's already ongoing and has been ongoing for at least 15 years, depending on where you want to start it. But that's a general de-Americanization of geopolitics and a de-Westernization of global geopolitics. And the trend has now reached critical mass, and I think it's as irreversible as globalization is, because countries that are coming into the global market, especially ones as powerful as China and India, want to participate in making the rules by which they themselves are expected to play. They are also using the system that the West created very effectively in order to maximize their interests. Let me just quote to you very briefly what Viktor Orban said as part of a speech in Hungary. He said that he sees the One Belt, One Road initiative as a new form of globalization which does not divide the world into teachers and students, but is based on common respect and common advantages. And the Sino-Russian relationship is a great example of a win-win relationship, as opposed to the competition between the EU and Russia over Ukraine, which was forced to make existential and civilizational choices, which it couldn't do by virtue of its history. Here, something different is happening. And the remarkable thing for me is that both the way the Chinese leaders speak and what Orban said is actually a throwback to Mikhail Gorbachev's famous December 1988 UN speech, in which he called for a new world in which socialism of his late variety, the positive variety, the late Soviet socialism, coexists with capitalism and a range of other economic, socio-economic, and political systems in a pluralistic world where no one's ideologies are imposed on anyone else, no regime change is practiced with catastrophic results for everyone involved. And this looks like what the Chinese are setting as a goal for themselves. The Russians are happy to hitch their wagon to it, but this seems to be the trend, the geopolitical trend that is on the rise.
Grzegorz, what is your view on that, this moving, evolving international landscape with China in the ascendancy, not just China, but other countries in Asia as well, like India?
Well, one more time, globalization, which I do understand as first liberalization and then integration of thus far separately to the extent performing national economies into one interconnected, interdependent, worldwide global economy is irreversible. But this is the good news, and it will change geopolitics. And I think that that was the momentum in the brief history of current stage of globalization, when at the same day, approximately, new President of the United States, Donald Trump, was shouting, because he was rather shouting than speaking, on the steps of the Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., America first, and the leader of China, President Xi, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, was saying that globalization is irreversible and China is in favor of free trade, etc. Because free trade is not an ideal solution for the challenges we have, but it is a good one. How much it will be win-win, we'll see, because win-win doesn't mean 1-to-1, it can mean 1.5 against 0.5, but definitely it is not like neoliberal globalization led by the USA recently, which was working on the behalf of enriching the few at the cost of many. But don't be naive. China's 16+1 program is not charity. Nobody will do what we have to do here. We have to raise our propensity to save. We have to invest more out of our own money, and structural funds from the European Union transferred to Eastern Europe, and China's direct investment here, they can only support our effort to invest more to catch up with more developed part of the world.
Okay, Victor, I want to give you a chance very quickly. I've only got about 40 seconds to respond to that. This is not about Chinese charity.
I think the One Belt, One Road initiative is not a charity. 16+1 is not a charity. Charity itself is not sustainable. I think we need to work together for the mutual benefit so that the cooperation itself will be sustainable, long-lasting, and everyone participating together in the 16+1 framework will be benefiting from this common effort of uplifting ourselves and upgrading our economy going forward.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.